This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD Andrea Raila of Raila Associates. She is a property tax reform advocate. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be on the show today.
First of all, Andrea, thank you. What is your background in property tax reform? And we understand that you are also a homeowner. So were you a property tax reform advocate first, or were you a homeowner first?
Well, I think I was a property tax advocate first because I didn't own a home until I was about 38 years old. But when I was a property taxpayer advocate, I used to work at the Cook County Board of Review. And I was a case analyst there after I had graduated from college. And I worked under the former governor, Pat Quinn. And we would do a lot of policy research on the fairness of property taxes, in addition to hearing hundreds of thousands of people come in and file tax appeals. And I feel very strongly that the work that we did, the justice work we did to make sure people only paid their fair share of property taxes, was great during that administration, in addition to the fact that we published studies that showed when properties were underassessed. For example, we looked at all baseball fields, professional baseball fields across the country, and we looked at whether or not Wrigley Field was underassessed and all of the others. So it was a very interesting job that I held. And then I went with the Taxpayer Advocate Office. Former Mayor Harold Washington hired me and two others to run his Taxpayer Advocate Office that was established by his administration. And we went out and gave tax appeal talks and explained the process to homeowners. So first and foremost, I think I was an advocate for property tax reform. I became a homeowner, first with a condo and then with a house. And I'm still appealing my own taxes and, of course, appealing other people's taxes who come and work with our firm.
I heard that in Cook County, the property tax appeals are more than in any other part of the country. Is that still the case?
That is true. We have the highest number of tax appeals in Cook County, the highest. And that's because the system is so regressive. We have now inched our way up to being the second highest tax state, just behind New Jersey. And when you have people, homeowners, businesses whose burdens of property taxes are great, you're going to see these higher levels of appeals. Now, typically, the appeal level across all jurisdictions can be about 2 or 3%. In our jurisdiction, sometimes it's as high as 23% of those filing tax appeals. And when you have that number of people filing tax appeals, it's a burden on the property tax system itself, because you have to have those governing agencies come in and decide whether or not you get relief or not. And we have three systems. You can go to the assessor's office to file an appeal, the Cook County Board of Review to file, and then you can go on to the State Property Tax Appeal Board. So the assessor sets those values, and if they're an error and you can't get it corrected there, you go to the Board of Review, which has higher jurisdiction over the assessor's office. If you don't find justice there, then you go to the state property tax appeal level and find justice there. And unfortunately, there's been a movement, and it was encouraged and advocated by Assessor Kaegi, to remove the Cook County, the State Property Tax Appeal Board from Cook County homeowners and businesses and not allow us to go there, under the auspices that it would make taxation more fair. But that was written up in an editorial he published in the Sun-Times and the Tribune. But I don't think that we should be not allowed to go up those three ladders to seek property tax relief.
Well, doesn't it seem that instead of going up that ladder, it would be more beneficial to go on the other way of the ladder to address the why there needs to be so many appeals. If the system were more properly run, then there would not be a need for appeals, and then we wouldn't have to have this high amount of appeals. What could we do to for the system to change so that there doesn't need to be so many appeals?
Well, you have to make sure that when you are the assessor of Cook County, that you run the office efficiently, and it's an administrative office. So when I ran for assessor in 2009, and when I ran for assessor in 2018, the first woman Democrat to ever run, I actually advocated that we have an appointed assessor and not an elected assessor. Just like we have appointed positions all across the country as assessor, we should consider that an appointed, so that you take the money out of that system. Now, the assessor who won doesn't take money from tax practitioners, but he takes money from others who have an investment in real estate in other ways, property owners, asset managers, appraisers, and so forth. So I think if we would just had an appointed assessor, that could clear things up, but you have to have a good administrator. And the administration of the property taxes is very bad right now, especially with the philosophy that every parcel, every property, whether it's a home, whether it's commercial, struggling under vacancy, they're considered assets that somehow make us wealthy, but they are not, because the property taxes are regressive, and we don't realize the wealth of our home until we sell it, right? But the assessor comes in and she sets the value of the home higher and higher and higher each triennial year, and we hold on to the home for 30 years until we find ourselves in Cook County and this across the state paying property taxes that is as high a payment as our mortgage payments. So the system really needs to be changed. I have thought of one way to do it is to cap property taxes and not let them go to a certain level, or having once you've owned the property for 20 years or 30 years, you pay no property taxes on the land. There are ways to advocate reducing our over-reliance on property taxes. And part of it is not only making sure that, we have caps on the tax rates and so forth, but realizing that we have to find other forms of income in order to not be so reliant on property taxes.
Well, have you seen other models in other parts of the country in which the government does not rely that much on property taxes, and what would they rely on instead?
In California, there's a good example of what happened in the 70s, where they passed Proposition 2, and that it required that the set value during that time would stay in place until the property sold. And when the property sold, it would be valued very close to the value of the property. It was sometimes called the welcome home tax. If you moved to California, bought a new property, that property market value was frozen, but then it's adjusted to the price that you paid for it. However, they still have reasonable rates over there that are a lot less of a burden to taxpayers. And that's why we see so many people move to California, to Florida, and Texas, because their property taxes are much more reasonable.
Have you any idea what California, Texas, and Florida rely on for their funding, if not that much on property taxes?
They rely on their state income tax, and they rely sometimes on a greater capitalization tax and fees that are collected by the cities or the municipalities that they are in. The income tax actually in Florida is quite low, but they also have federal dollars that come in. So there is an ability to change the mixture of public revenue to be directed away from property taxes, like, for instance, in Arizona. I'd say Arizona is the key state that's set up for a public finance structure that moves away from property taxation.
In Chicago and in Illinois, but especially in Chicago, there is so much funding going to the schools. In Arizona, if they could afford, not being reliant on property taxes, but maybe their schools are not do not have such high funding, great funding that the Chicago needs.
That's right. But the problem with Chicago's property taxes in Cook County is that we fund the pensions of the officials. Elected officials' pensions are gravely high and they need to be reformed. And, who would have thought that our property tax bills sometimes will go 30% paying for their pensions? So we could restrict property taxes from not paying that. But it's a reliable source. So that's why they're putting everything on it. For instance, we have something called the TIF, right? And the TIF is controlled by the city of Chicago. And in my property tax bill, you can see that there are various agencies that collect. And of course, the school taxes are some of the highest. It takes 55% of my property tax bill, but the school taxes can be lowered because you can consolidate your schools. We have so many local units of government that can be consolidated. We have the largest number of local units of government than any state in the nation. And that really has to be addressed. Even the governor said it has to be addressed, but there's not a will to do it. And there's no way of getting it out of the legislature. Legislature could put it on the ballot. Should we reduce and consolidate our local school districts and other township governments? If you put it on the ballot and the people vote yes for it, they can do it. That's the initiative we need. And then there are other types of districts that tax us, like the city of Chicago and the public library and the TIF district. The TIF district is run by the city of Chicago. And on my property tax bill, the TIF district, which I have no say in, takes 11% of my tax bill. So I'm paying, like, just for the TIF district alone, last year I paid $4,500, and this year I pay $1,600. But my tax bill still went up, as you can see. And then for the county of Cook, they represent about a total of maybe 7% of my taxes. They have actually a tax cap, and these levies are established by the budget that they need, and they should only be increased by 5% or according to the rate of inflation. But each and every year, we see property taxes inching up. One of the biggest issues that I see with homeowners assessments and business assessments, are they any different than what they used to be, let's say in 2018 compared to now 2023? I think absolutely they are, because the new administration uses an algorithm to make values on properties. And if there's bad information in that algorithm, there's bad information that comes out. And that's with what we see is higher and higher property values and higher land values as well. I've never seen this before, but land values are increasing so significantly that on my tax bill alone, 75% of it pays the land value. If you remember last year in 2021, when the city of Chicago got reassessed, the Pilsen community, Chicago's West Side, they were up in arms. The increases were phenomenal. What they didn't know was that the land values were increased tremendously by 75%. As long as you increase those land values, it's very difficult to get your market value down. So I think, and it's the neighborhoods chosen to increase land values are sometimes not even neighborhoods that are like the Gold Coast, Lincoln Park, They're in Rogers Park, Albany Park. They're in Pilsen, where these land values go up.
Who decides whether land values go up or not?
It's the Cook County Assessor that establishes the land values. And when the city of Chicago was reassessed in 2021, no values increased in the Fulton market area, for instance, in the downtown districts, the commercial districts. None of those values went up, but you could see values in land going up. We're studying land values, and we have a great land value study that's almost coming, to be prepared to be published.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to discuss land values and why they are going up as much as they are.
Who's doing the land value study?
It's a group called Traen,
Mm-hmm.
And it will be posted on their website. And also we will be asking to submit it to the International Associating Officers Assessment Association, IAAO, in their next conference next year.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's a worthy study. More concerning than not is the fact that a lot of times homeowner exemptions and senior exemptions are falling off. And when the property transfers, the homeowner's exemption should stay with the transfer. And then at the beginning of the year, it can be taken off by the assessor. But we've seen a lot of taxpayers file for their exemptions, their homeowners exemptions and seniors exemptions, put in the paperwork online or submit it, and then they're never put on. So that administration of the assessment exemptions, and there's at least 8 exemptions, that exemption department needs to have great overhaul or improvement, because we're not seeing exemptions going back on those rolls, and it's too many mistakes being made.
So it's only human error then that the back office is not updating the request to for the homeowners exemptions and the seniors exemption. Is it didn't they go back to having it automatically filed for seniors because seniors won't get any younger and senior freeze, or hasn't that been the case?
Yes, there was a time when COVID came where they let the senior exemptions stay on and you didn't have to apply for them.
Mm-hmm.
They passed a law that says a senior doesn't have to apply each and every year. And that's fine. And the homeowner's exemption is supposed to stay on and not fall off or have to be applied for each and every year. Ideally, that's what should happen, and that's the law. However, when COVID happened, Cook County Assessor went to legislators and said, we need to allow the senior freeze exemption to stay on automatically for 2 years. And that's really a big mistake, because the senior freeze exemption is based on you have to be 65 years old, but you can only make $65,000 or less. And so when you keep that senior freeze on for 2 years, that senior could have gotten, his IRA in. He could have been making $70,000, $150,000. Nobody audited that. And so that you should never automatically apply an income-based exemption. And ours is called the senior freeze, 65, making less than 65,000, or that's the threshold, because there's probably hundreds of thousands of exemption dollars that should not have been given away, because seniors do get their IRS sometimes rolled over, and their income will move from 65 to 90,000 at some time. Mm-hmm. So that was a mistake, and we shouldn't let that happen again. But even during COVID, what happened was that the assessor felt that all homeowners would suffer, and that the great amount of unemployment would devalue homes. So he devalued all the homes by about 8%, 8 to 10%, but he didn't even set that market value low or at all. He didn't put a standard market value. So he was giving 10% and 8% tax breaks, actual market value devaluations on homes that were $4 million, $20 million, And those property taxes were reduced for some of the wealthiest people in the New Trier and Barrington areas.
So the people that own homes that were worth about $1 million or less, they were not getting these exemptions?
They got the COVID 8% exemption, they did. And that rolled over once for the city of Chicago, but it rolled over twice for people in Winnetka with multi-million-dollar mansions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the only assessor in the country that did that took off like $34 million in real estate taxes and then shifted it on to the commercial property owners. And that raised commercial property tax bills. And only the assessor in New Orleans gave a COVID tax break to commercial properties, and it shifted that onto the residential property owner. So I think that was probably the greatest shift in property taxation burden from wealthy homeowners and some homeowners that got a bit of relief. If you had a $500,000 home, you might have saved about $200 in taxes, but it was still a big mistake. And the Sun-Times covered it extensively about the COVID cuts. But it was no way that unemployment was going to ever be a problem for District 2 of Cook County, where some of the most wealthiest property owners are.
And what was the rationale that it was Assessor Kaegi, right?
Yes. He believed that with COVID, market values on real estate would plummet. And he even had his chief of staff ask assessors all over the county and all over the nation, are you going to adjust your assessments lower for residential property owners? And they all said no. Even people that were in different counties, tax assessors in Lake County said, no, we're not doing that. We don't know what the impact of COVID is on market values. And if you remember, actual market values during COVID, particularly in May, June, July, August of 2020, they skyrocketed. There was a huge increase in values of homes. So that whole theory that he had to give a 10% adjustment to all homeowners, especially the wealthy homeowners, and those reductions rolled over 2 years for the wealthiest of homeowners, was really a shift onto the burdens of the small mom and pop businesses.
Did any media investigate whether Assessor Kaegi got contributions from those District 2 homeowners?
I don't know. I don't follow that very closely. I know that the Cook County Assessor's taken a stand that he will not take money from tax lawyers and practitioners, consultants that work in the field. However, you don't have to necessarily take that as a stand that you'll do something right. You need to run your office well and make sure that everyone who puts in their application for an exemption, it gets put on. Mm-hmm. And you have to make sure that when you do tax appeals, you look at the evidence and make the right decisions at the assessor's level. We see a lot of times us asking for field inspectors to come out to verify vacancies or problems with the property, and it doesn't happen, and you don't get the relief you need at the assessor. So a lot of the property tax professionals don't even file a tax appeal with the assessor. And he's actually said, our office must be doing a great job because nobody comes here to file appeals anymore. It's because you don't get relief at all. The worst thing that has happened is that exemptions, not only are they not put on in a timely way when the application goes in, he's really put a lot of effort into upgrading the IT process, and you can file online, but emphasizing only IT and not having the right people staff the assessor's office. You have people who are inexperienced, and you have a lack of number of people staffing your office. It's a huge office, and they need to have more funding to get more people in there that can help operate that office in a timely way.
Earlier, you mentioned that there was a land value study by Traen. What does Traen stand for?
Traen is an acronym, and it's actually TRAEN, Inc. So it's a network group of training, research, advocacy, and network, an education network. So it's a kind of a strange an acronym, but it's Training, Research, Advocacy, and Education Network, Inc. And you can go online to see that. But I think when we saw what happened with the COVID reductions, it caused a huge increase in the multiplier, and the multiplier went up like 13%. The multiplier hadn't gone up that much, and the last time it had gone up that much was when we had the crash of 2007 to 2008, and the market values just plummeted. As you remember, all the homes, just the market values plummeted, and it raised the multiplier at that time almost like 15%. Well, when he cut the 75% of all homes in Cook County, the multiplier again went up like 11 or 12%, and it shifted the taxes onto the commercial property owners. And I wish that more chambers of commerce came out and spoke out more about that. They did come out and they were published in the Sun Times and the Tribune about that was a very bad mistake to look at the markets, that you can't predict a crystal ball. You can't predict when market values are going to drop.
So what you're saying is that 75% of homeowners got their taxes reduced, and then that tax burden was shifted onto the commercial property owners?
Right. We collect about $34 billion in property taxes in Cook County, and billions of dollars were shifted over to the commercial property owner. And we had some coverage about that. But when we're facing the Chicago reassessment year, every 3 years, the county of Cook gets reassessed, and the Chicagoland area is the first district. And it's going to be reassessed in 2024, and it'll carry over until 2025 and 2026. With what happened in 2021 when we were reassessed, we don't want to see that happen again, where people are protesting because they don't actually realize their land values have tripled, or they're not getting the relief that they need at the assessor or the board because the assessor can't generate decisions fast enough and open up townships fast enough. And then the board is slower because they don't get the published assessment rolls until very late. So that's why our tax bills come out so late. Normally, our tax bill would be the first installment will be in February, due March 1st, and the second installment comes out in July and is due August 1st. And as you know, our tax bill is due, our second installment is due on December 1. And that is a real problem that begins with the assessor's office trying to get their books published, trying to get their decisions made on assessments, and then rolling over all those 38 townships to the Cook County Board of Review that has to have a legal window of 6 months to make those decisions as well. And so we're getting tax bills later. And that hurts the school districts too.
So what you're saying is that the monies from the property taxes are not distributed to the taxing bodies until all those appeals are heard and settled?
That's right. And so the taxing bodies have complained to the mayor and has complained to the president of Cook County. We need to have these decisions completed on time so that we can know what our budgets look like. Can we, cap it at 5%? So they've been working to try to help make that a reality, but it's still very difficult when you get these agencies pointing the finger, you're to blame, or the state property tax appeal board is to blame.
When you mentioned earlier that the taxpayers are skipping appealing to the Cook County Assessor and just going directly to the BOT, I thought that they had to go step by step, first to the Cook County Assessor, and then if they're dissatisfied with that decision, then they go to BOT, Board of Review, BOR, Board of Review.
Yeah, the Board of Review, that's a common misconception. Actually, you can file first at the assessor's office or not file at the assessor's office and then go directly to the Board of Review and then get your decision at the Board of Review. My concern with that is you should have two opportunities to have somebody review your market value. Because if you don't get justice on that market value at the assessor or the board, your second and tax bill installment goes up. And that's why you see a lot of outcry now. Second installment tax bills went up, specifically for the Northwest region, District 2, Barrington, Skokie, Hanover Park, Wilmette, and so forth, and Evanston. So you really need two bites at the apple. You need to go to the assessor, particularly if your market value is way above what it should be, or you have property characteristic errors. The assessor says your property is 2,000 square feet when it's only 1,500 square feet. Your basement should not be included in the square footage. Unheated attic should not be included. You might have a wrong classification. The market value starts with the assessor's office, and his office needs to be open to take in appeals and understand and correct those appeals there. So you don't have to go to the Board of Review. But because he does not act fast enough, and 90% of the cases are no changed, even good cases, 90% of all the tax appeals that go to the assessor's office are no changed. They get sent over to the Board of Review. The Board of Review is pretty overwhelmed by them. The Board of Review might reduce maybe, I don't know, 70% of them, sometimes less. And then you go to the State Property Tax Appeal Board, and usually the volume is not as great, but about 90% of the appeals are successful at that level. So I think the assessor has to be able to have a fair running tax appeal agency, as well as set market values accurately and make sure the exemptions are placed on properly and permanently until that transfer of the house goes through, or at least advocate in the legislature for ways that we can move away from the property taxes and have an adjustment, like we have a 3% flat rate income tax. Other states have graduated income taxes where if you make $50,000, you pay 1%. You make $150,000, you pay 3%, etc. We don't have that here in Illinois. That would be a solution to do that instead of relying on property taxes.
Earlier, I mentioned, I think I did ask, how did he come up with the land values of they did rise, and then is there a formula that the Assessor Kaegi is using to increase the land value for every parcel?
It'll be interesting. We have to send out some Freedom of Information Act requests to find out some of his formulas. In the past, there's been something called in the industry, the Blue Alcott book. You can look at sales that actually happen. Unfortunately, I think if he's looking at sales, he'll look at a property, let's say in Hyde Park, that a person bought the home and the land, might have bought it for $900,000, and he'll set that land value at $900,000 when he notices that the person tore down the building and built a new structure, and he'll set a high value on that land based on that total purchase price. I think that is not logical, and that's what sets off these pockets of neighborhoods who get triple, sometimes 50% increases, 100% increases in their land values.
Isn't there a separation between land values and improvements? If that 900,000 is for
both,
yeah, for both, but isn't there a isn't it the bill isn't there somewhere that states, so how much is the improvements and how much is the land?
There used to be a reassessment notice that came out that separated the land value and the building value.
Right.
And it was really important for taxpayers, commercial and residential. It was very important for them to see what land values are, what are the improvement values, and the total value. And that was the standard since Tom Hines, Jim Houlihan, Joe Barrios. They always gave the separate values. When the next assessor came, the Cook County Assessor came, he eradicated that. And now we only get reassessment notices with one value. And that's not good transparency. You need to be transparent in your land values and transparent in the improvement values. And there was also a notification the last time in 2018, the last notification, it broke down what comparables that the assessor used in order to increase your value. And it also gave what sales they discovered that increased your value. That was one of the best, if not, I give it an A+ in transparency of your reassessment notice and how the values are set. We have nothing like that today. It is just one value. It tells you what your classification is, and he at the end of the day, he says, well, you can go online and see the details of your property.
So when you do go online, are there details?
There are details. You can go to cookcountyassessor.com and you would hit the search link and you would hit property and you would put in your permanent index number. And when you clicked on it, you'd have to scroll down the page and it says advanced search, and it'll give you all the details of the property.
Would the details include comparables then?
The details could include comparables only if you search for comparables. So there's another link that says, click here for comparable properties. You put in your permanent index number and it'll bring up comparable properties to yours. And you can search for it that way.
I've done assessment appeals before, and then it seemed as if when I received those comparables on the tax bill, they were not the ones that they were not complete. And when I went to do my own research, I found other ones that had the same classification, same square footage, and were sold for much less. And it was a much more it was a comparable that wasn't revealed on the tax bill. Was there a reason for that, so that the property owner would not be able to use that for an appeal, or was I just doing it wrong?
You did the right thing. We give these property tax talks all across different libraries, chambers of commerce have us come out and speak. We gave tax talks many times to the NHS or the Chicago Housing Authorities or the Community Investment Corporation. And we explain how you can research to look at your own comparables. And you're absolutely right. When those A+ reassessment notices came in, and I give it an A+ because it gave you the land and it gave you the building, but it also gave you those 5 comparables. But that's important to see what comparables the assessor's computer used. Then you have the right, like everyone in the United States that pay property taxes, you have the right to log on to the assessor's database and see if comparables that are truly like yours, because who knows their home better than the property owner, and pick the comparables that you feel strongly represents your home and not a computerized search. So, but it at least allowed people to say, oh, this is what I do. I go and I look for comparables to see if my market value is accurate. That's why getting back to that basic transparent notification is so critical in Cook County. And the assessor really needs to go back to that basic fundamental understanding for the taxpayers to challenge their market value if it's too high. They'll see the land, the building, they'll see comparables, they'll go online, find their own comparables, and then be able to do their own evidence. I'm a big advocate for teaching and empowering homeowners to learn how to use that tax assessment system in the assessor's office online, how to find out where their market values are they comparable to their neighboring homes, and do it themselves without having to hire a service provider.
I actually have like a master list of the comparables that had the same neighborhood code and the same property code. And why should I spend so much time doing it when the assessor could actually just provide the information, could just crank out the information and actually have a correct assessment of the property? Why, that's what I don't understand.
Well, let me say that Cook County is the second largest assessment district in the country. It's run by the Central Assessment Office, the Assessor's Office. There was a time we have 38 townships, and 8 of them were in Chicago, and the other 30 townships had actual assessors that are elected as they are now, but they set the assessments. But now it was condensed and centralized, and I don't think it's a good system. It's like, a system that is, it's too overwhelming. We have, you have 18 million parcels of property, and you have to use a mainframe computer, what's going to be called a computer-assisted mass appraisal technique. It's a long word, but it's an algebraic formula, a 14-digit algebraic formula that puts in all this data, permits pulled, sales, what income people make, and then they come up with these market values just through a computerized fashion.
Is that what Assessor Kaegi used? Is that what he implemented?
Yes, and even though he's gotten great acclamations, like, oh, his formula is really good, we can see that it doesn't always work because there's no control for inflation, there's no control for anything, and that just the whole regressiveness of property taxation is.
What other controls should there be placed in addition to inflation?
Well, they have all the property characteristics that they put in, mm-hmm. and it's set in your neighborhood. So it could involve 400 pins and 400 homes, or it could involve in certain neighborhoods only 35 pins or homes. All of that data is put in, the characteristics of the property, socioeconomic factors, were a lot of construction cost permits pulled, did a lot of sales happen, what is the area's average income, and that weighs in on that final number that gets put in the reassessment rolls, mm-hmm. your reassessment notification that comes to you. And that's pretty standard practice across the country. But in our case, because we have such a large system, there's going to be problems. And if you're short-staffed and you can't open the townships on time because you're short-staffed, or the computer, has a crash because there's new technology that doesn't talk with the Cook County Board of Review and so forth, you have, problems like that. You're going to have a system that is going to always have outliers. And I would be an advocate of saying, once you come up with Rogers Park's assessment values in 2024, you look at those assessment values, and when you see outliers, homes and businesses that are way increased by 200%, pull those back in to your system so that you don't have the homeowner and the business person being the victim of an outlier, because there are outliers in this mathematical scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Property taxes is not just about mathematics and how great your IT formula is. It really is people driven, and people have a right to examine how you got that market value, and is it fair, and only pay their fair share of the property tax bill.
I was always under the impression that the triennial assessment was reliant mostly on any new improvements, the property characteristics, and most importantly, on comparable sales. But evidently, that's not the case.
Sometimes if there are not enough sales out there, they've got to kind of guesstimate what mm-hmm. appreciation values are. Mm-hmm. So it's not a perfect system. It lays out all of these, appraisal values by a computer But sometimes with commercial properties, even when a commercial property sales and it has a sale there, they are not a set of value on the sale, and they'll use the income approach. There's a shopping center that sold for $11 million, and it was in Morton Grove, and another shopping center sold for $11 million, 25 miles away. And none of them, when they were reassessed, were assessed at 11 million. They were both assessed at $22 million, and they had actual arm length sales. And we had to take the case to the assessor. It was an arm's length sale of 11 million. Even the income justified for that. And the assessor gave it a reduction to 20 million. And we had to take the case all the way to the Board of Review, which they set the value at 11 million. And we see this happening over and over again, where sometimes there's an error in classification. There's a property that it was a greenhouse and they are assessed at 10% of their market values, like homeowners, because it's more like farmland. And they were assessed at 25% of the commercial rate. And that was a 85-year-old business that worked in Palatine Township as a greenhouse. And their tax bill went from $25,000 to $190,000. They got no relief at the assessor. The Board of Review failed to change the classification, so it went to the State Property Tax Appeal Board. But the family, the generations that ran that greenhouse, didn't know what else to do, so they just leveled it. They tore the entire greenhouse down, so it became vacant land, and the vacant land is now assessed at 10%. But that is a true story of the worst thing that can happen in the tax assessment, property tax assessment system, that there is an error made from the assessor's office from bringing it up to 10%, up to 25% commercial rate, and the whole business was dissolved.
And when Joe Barrios was assessor, there was much talk that he favored the commercial property owners over the homeowners. But then how have things changed between these two assessors, between Joe Barrios and Fritz Kaegi?
I think the change is that when you look at the levels of assessments that were increased in the loop area, that those levels were not as high as what Kaegi did in the Barrios administration. They would increase the market values in the commercial area, and then they would get them reduced ultimately, either through the Assessor Barrios's office or the Board of Review. But they always were increased just a little, but enough to still get billions of dollars in, literally billions of dollars came in every time these commercial entities were reassessed, even though they weren't assessed continuously up the level.
Billions of tax dollars were able to come in because of the increase in assessment, is what you mean, right?
Right. Increase in assessments and increase in tax rates. Mm-hmm. So they always got more money, but it was increase in those tax rates or an increase maybe in the multiplier that got them more. Now with COVID, it's horrible because they're still struggling properties. Big properties in the loop are still vacant. Many properties are just not getting any kind of income stream, but his assessments have gone tremendously high on those property owners. And you're seeing foreclosures everywhere because he's doing that hard line is, raise the rates on the commercial property owners, even the mom and pop stores, and keep a nice as low as possible on the homeowners. And I think that is that's driven by a political agenda. The commercial property owner doesn't vote; the homeowners votes with their feet. And I think you need to move away from villainizing commercial property owners or villainizing any property owner, and always looking at the homeowner or the commercial owner coming to your agency for sincere, justified tax relief, but always looking at them with a fisheye that somehow they're not being honest. They're not trying to improve their property, so you're not going to give them any vacancy relief. There's a set philosophical agenda, and not all properties are assets because we can't liquefy them fast enough, no matter how great the market value might be. And until we have a Cook County assessor and elected officials that embrace the really difficult step of changing and getting away from reliance on property taxes for our school systems, for our huge black holes of TIF funding, until we have a sincere advocate for that, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. We're going to get new triennial reassessments that are huge and the land values that are going up, and there's no control of that. So we have to have politicians that, are true leaders. One of the worst things that happened in legislation 2 years ago was that when you get a tax refund, How can you get one? It starts with the assessor's office. The assessor's office can give you a certificate of error, meaning you went to the assessor and you said, my house has a square footage error. You say it's 2,000 square feet and it's really only 1,000 square feet. By law, he has to change that square footage. Obviously, that might even reduce your property taxes by a half, possibly. And you can go back 3 years to get that corrected. And that should be right. If you had a significant error in your property that caused the value to be twice as much, you can go back 3 years. There have been no certificate of errors issued going back 3 years since Kaegi took office. Minimal. And there's a lot of errors, but he does not like to give those refunds out. So he advocated so many refunds are being given by the State Property Tax Appeal Board and given, by the circuit courts, or even given in the past a lot by the former administration of the last 3 or 4 assessors. But Kaegi has felt that giving certificates of errors hurts the schools because they don't get the same amount. So he passed a law, and the law was that the school districts, when a certificate of error is issued to you, let's say because you had square footage error, they can tax you on that. So when the tax bills come out, the school districts can take back those refunds by raising the tax rates up around that whole area there that the refunds came out of. It's a backdoor way to make them, allowing them to take that money back after it was granted to you because you were unjustly taxed. And even
so Kaegi actually provides the information to those taxing bodies that that area, some property owners got relief, and it's time to raise the request for funding in that area.
Actually, what happens is the school districts and those that can take that money back, they look at the assessment rolls and they look at the refunds that were granted. So the Cook County Treasurer shows them, these are all the refunds that were granted in this area. And that particular school district says, oh, $50,000 was given to that area. We're going to raise our budget up 1 or 2% to take that 50,000 from that whole area and put it in our pockets. And this was even Maria Pappas did a study that showed that the level of levy increase at 5% or capped at inflation or whatever is less is now out the windows because the state's new law, which is they call it the recapture money that's refunded to owners, reduces, it gets driven back to the agencies that need it, and all the other tax bills in the area have to be increased in order to capture, that budget. And I asked Cook County Assessor Kaegi, and I asked Cook County Treasurer Maria Pappas if they would advocate against that law passing, and they both said no. And then yet she's in her study, she's saying, this is a bad law. It's the recapturing money that was not justified and not warranted to be taken from the taxpayers. It was an error to begin with. These were errors. The taxpayer won their day in court. And now these districts can take and raise their budgets and their tax levies so they can take those erroneous error of assessments back. And I think that's a fundamental flaw in that system. And I'm disappointed that those two leaders of the assessor's office and the treasurer didn't advocate to stop that bill. And we did advocate to stop it, and it passed anyway.
The taxing bodies, when they request money, who approves their budgets when they request money?
The school district, they will have their township trustees. They will say, okay, we need about, let's say, $100,000. And when they know how much is in the tax pool of property tax dollars, then they'll say, oh, well, we only need 100,000, so we will only increase our rate 2%. And they have to make that judgment, and then those tax dollars get raised, and you can see them on your second installment tax bill, where the miscellaneous ones, in this case, that's the water reclamation and park districts, they collected $1,000 for taxes. The school district collected $7,800. And then in the municipalities, the TIF and so forth, collected $4,500. And it goes on until the tax bill is $14,000, whatever it is. But they have to typically they have to keep the rate capped at 5, or what is the inflation rate? I mean, the inflation rate went up to 9, but nobody went up to 9. But they have to have those type of things, or they also have to put it on as a referendum. So there are areas in our county that put a question: should Evanston Township or the College of Evanston raise their tax rates? And then the city voters get to vote on that. But we don't. It's not always a function here that you see that in the city of Chicago, because we're home rule. And when you're not, a lot of times you can put that referendum out. I think that's a healthier way to raise awareness of the budgetary process and be a part of it, is actually have it on a referendum.
So it's the board of every taxing body that approves the recommended budget by the president?
Yes, and then once they make that vote come through, they can also say, oh, and by the way, there is $150 million that have been given back by refunds to people who did not, those assessments never should have been made that way. And we are now going to take that as a portion of our budgets. And that's coming back to the school districts. Again, that's this recapture law that no public official advocated against it, but they're all saying that it's a bad thing now.
So what you're saying is that those taxing bodies will say that that money that was refunded to the homeowners is now missing from our budget, so we need to recapture it.
That's right, but it never should be in the budget anyway, because it was a wrong assessment. And that's the kind of transparency that is not clear in the Cook County property tax system. When I worked for Harold Washington administration, I worked under the comptroller Ron Pecor, and the Illinois Property Tax Federation commissioned us to do a study, and it was called the Illinois Property Tax System, Taxation Without Representation, and it was done in 1992. And it identified the same inequities that the ProPublica tax study did in May of 2017. We had the exact type of calculations of discrepancy in the Black and brown community, of those being overtaxed and so forth. The only reason why our study didn't get wide coverage was because the former assessor, Tom Hines, didn't want to give it a serial number. It's called an ISBN number. And every book that's written, if you get that catalog number, then you can find that book anywhere. But he removed that. and so, but it was very interesting because ProPublica authors, even Christopher Berry from the University of Chicago, they ultimately found the book, our study, and said, yeah, you were right back in 1992, how bad the system was.
How was Tom Hines? He was just Cook County Assessor. what powers did he have to remove an ISBN number from a book?
Yeah, well, that had to be in agreement with the Illinois Taxpayer Federation, right? If the Illinois Taxpayer Federation had said, no, we want to put that number on there, but there was some politics all around that happened. But, we're thinking about creating the book and establishing an ISBN number anyway, and just to show, how important that study was.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, breaking it down, the property owners, commercial property owners, and homeowner property owners are not going to be able to get any relief at all for their property taxes.
I think you will get, if you file at the assessor's office, which I encourage everyone to do in Chicago that gets reassessed, file, even though only 10% will win, you should still file there. And then take your case to the Board of Review, where maybe more than half, maybe 65% will get relief. And then if you have to go to the State Property Tax Appeal Board, you could go there. But did you know that you can go back to the assessor in the next tax year and file again with him and at the board? So you can file each and every year if you need to get that tax justice that you deserve.
But what would be the premise for filing back with the assessor? He already said his office already rejected the first appeal.
Because you get different analysts and there may be a change in internal policy, or, he may start realizing that he does make mistakes, because I don't think that they think that they make mistakes. I think that they have a perfect computer formula, and it's so perfect it's been given an award, but it has outliers. It has problems that taxpayers have a right to go to them and say, this is a real problem. There was a property owner who took his case into the assessor's office and said, I only have land. I used to have a house on the land, but a plane hit the house and it caught on fire and the house is removed. And he had pictures, and it was no change by the assessor's office. It went to the Board of Review, and it was no change there. They just reduced the value of the land. They didn't take the improvement off. So I'm just saying that there are problems, that there are human errors, even in the tax appeal before the assessor, even in the tax appeals before the board. They can make an error, but they highlight those errors, and hopefully they learn from them, so that, we're not all perfect and we want to have tax justice. But when you have a staff that's, thinking that every taxpayer that comes in is trying to hide something from you, and you're giving 90% no reductions, you've reduced the refunds request by 85%.
But isn't that because they know that if they do give a refund, the taxing bodies will increase the assessment, increase the request for funding the following year or following years, and then any refund will just fly out of the pocket of the taxpayers.
Oh, fly out of the pocket of the surrounding taxpayers, and that's way. But you would think, knowing that a justice would come from the beginning, which is at the assessor's office, that comes up with the market values and that needs to correct for them. Because now he's advocated for a law that does pass, and it's called the recapture law of refunds. And so did Maria Pappas. So, and
who was behind that law, the recapture what?
It's called the recapture the tax refunds.
Recapture tax refunds. Yes. Who wanted to that law?
It was put in the middle of the night. There was no discussion.
Who was the sponsor?
The sponsor was actually it was an amendment inserted into legislation that was bound to be passed. Mm-hmm. And the legislation was advocated by Maria Pappas, because it was changing the tax delinquency date, and we needed to change it back to October. So that was a law that she wanted passed. And then there was another law. It was a good law, and it had something to do with nonprofit housing. And then in the middle of the night, literally, they put that language in.
Do we know who put it in?
I don't know who put it in.
And is there in the public record, isn't there like in the state legislature like a federal register of anything that is
I think it was advocated by the school system lobbyists, the school lobbyists. It was introduced without any formal discussion, without it going to revenue committee, because it should have gone to revenue. It bypassed that. And it was,
how are they able to bypass? Isn't it required that everything has to go through committee
yes,
first?
absolutely. But there are things that don't work the way they should in the Illinois legislature. And if they want something like that to sneak through, that's the way they get it snuck through. And not only that, all of the representatives and all of the senators voted yes for it, and except for two. And there were two Republicans that were downstate, and they said, this is a terrible law. These are assessments that were wrong. These are market values that were wrong. And that's why that taxpayer is getting refunded. And we shouldn't allow the county agencies or any taxing agency to go and then grab that money back by raising their rates, because it wasn't supposed to be on the table to begin with, right? So it was, I've been a lobbyist for many years, for about 30 years. I've seen some things in the legislature happen. Nothing astonished me more than this recapture law. How it got in, it was sneaky, it was in the middle of the night, and how all of the elected officials didn't.
Did the elected officials know about it? How long was the bill anyway? Maybe they didn't read everything.
We lobbied against it for 6 to 7 months. And then even in the veto session, we lobbied it and we asked the governor to veto just that section out, and he refused to do it.
So there were a lot of lobbyists that convinced the legislators and the governor in both houses, right?
Yes.
Senate.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a shame. That's a shame with our legislative process. It's sometimes the status quo. It protects the public taxing bodies. It protects the elected officials. That's why I'm a big advocate for a constitutional convention. In 2028, every 20 years, and in 2028, we'll have a constitutional question on the ballot. Do you want to have a constitutional convention or not? It bypasses the legislative process. We elect 118 citizens, not elected officials, citizens, and then they deal with these difficult property tax issues and other issues. And we had a successful constitutional convention in 1970, and in that constitutional convention, we had many things change, but we had the right for every 20 years to look at our constitution and say what needs to be changed. And we had it for the first time in 1988. Then we had it in 2009. And each time the status quo, the politicians and everyone else were like, no, we don't need a constitutional convention. Trust the legislative process. And we were outspent $14 million to like $300,000. That scared people into saying, no, we're going to vote no on this. Again, we're doing things over.
What year again is the vote coming up for a constitutional?
It'll be on the ballot in 2028. And for me, that's only like 5 years away. And I think we said no in 1988 because we were outspent 20-1, and they said no, we don't need it in 2009. And I think that 20 years now, so 60 years out, we should change it, because we can see how dysfunctional the legislative process is and how sneaky it can be at times.
You mentioned earlier that for maybe a Cook County assessor should be appointed instead. Who would appoint the assessor?
I think it should be a panel of incorporated with a citizens advocates of it could even be somebody who is a park district staff. It could be the president of Cook County, or someone she's appointed to make that, or some type of judge, someone from the city. And then that body of 12 people would decide who to appoint.
Because the thing is that what we're seeing is that maybe private interests are funding the campaigns of assessors. But if that assessor were appointed, then whoever is doing the appointing could also be funded by the private interests.
That's true. You could also get those people from the Civic Federation, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, and the stakeholders have that privilege of appointing.
And who are the stakeholders that have most at stake concerning assessments?
Well, it's got to be homeowners and commercial property owners.
Mm-hmm. But what groups are involved in representing the homeowners and the commercial property owners?
Commercial property owners, they're chambers of commerce that represent commercial property owners, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. Who represents homeowners? I think sometimes it could be the Taxpayer Federation of Illinois. It could be the building owners and BOMO. It's the for people who have multi-unit rental properties. There's a lot of advocacy group. My Block Club is a big advocate for homeowners. It's the Edgewater Glen Association. So you do have representation through there. Neighborhood Housing Service is a nonprofit that advocates for new property owners. The Community Investment Corporation advocates for new property owners, single family owners, 2 flats and 3 flats. There's a lot of representation out there that could help with the appointment of the Cook County Assessor. But typically, sometimes it's only the Cook County president that appoints, or they give it only to the mayor of Chicago to appoint. And I think that you need to have a good mixture of advocacy.
Yes, definitely. Otherwise, it's practically the same thing. It's just whoever is responsible for the assessments will be politically motivated.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Andrea Raila, property tax reform advocate, and you have been so helpful in helping us understand this process better, but there is still so much to learn, and we need to do more interviews in the future.
I'd be more than happy to, especially as we come upon the new triennial reassessment of the city of Chicago in 2024.
When would that be happening?
I think the reassessment notices, the first ones might come out in late February or March. So the faster the assessment notices that come out and that you can resolve is when you can get a timely property tax bill.
And just to clarify, Cook County is still the taxing district that has the most appeals.
Right, the most appeals.
And for how long? For how long has that been?
That started back in, I believe, at the end of Tom Hines's administration, and it's just gone up more and more and more. And we're the second largest assessment district, but if we would to help at all is give the 30 elected township assessors the power to assess market values within their own townships. Who knows their townships better than the elected township assessor? And then that would only give Cook County Assessor Kaegi the right to oversee the 8 townships in the city of Chicago. And I think things would be assessed better if you had that system back that existed previously before it was changed to this, centralized power structure where one assessor dominates the whole market.
All right, Andrea Raila, thank you so much for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today.
Thanks for having me.